They stole the one gift that could have given me freedom on my own birthday. They know me as Vanessa. If you dare to watch this, stay close. Have you ever loved a devil disguised as family? My grandfather's voice was steady, almost proud, when he asked, "Did you like the car I sent you last year?" The word car sliced straight through me. What car? I hadn't received a single thing. No note, no keys, nothing but their pitiful excuses about money being tight. My grandfather's eyes shifted to my parents, who stood stiff, their faces draining of color like spilled milk. The room went deathly still. Then came the questions, the unraveling, the chaos that tasted like burned trust. My parents had always controlled my life, my curfews, my choices, even my friends. But this was different. They'd taken what was meant to be mine. They'd stolen a future that belonged to me, and they'd smiled while doing it. The house felt smaller with my grandfather's stare pinning them to the wall. Years of secrets cracked open, spilling poison across the carpet. I remembered how I'd worked 2 jobs, scraping by, thinking they were helping me save for college. Meanwhile, they hid a brand new car under their filthy lies. Their voices tangled in desperate explanations, tripping over each other like children caught red-handed. But the damage was done. I saw them for who they really were, jailers of my dreams, wearing the gentle masks of parents. My grandfather's jaw clenched, rage blooming in his eyes, and I felt something ignite inside me too. A flame I'd smothered for years finally burned to life. They thought they could keep me caged. They were about to learn what happens when a caged bird decides to fly, and drag their perfect little world down with her. My parents tried to calm him, spinning sweet little stories about delays and title issues and protecting me from insurance costs. But my grandfather wasn't a fool. His voice was a blade, slicing through their lies. You kept a car meant for your daughter? You stole her chance to stand on her own. They stammered, reaching for sympathy, painting themselves as saviors instead of thieves. I watched them unravel, the panic crawling across their faces, their precious illusions cracking. For so long, they'd ruled me with guilt, weaponizing my love against me, twisting it until I thought my place was under their thumb. Not anymore. My grandfather's eyes met mine, fierce with a pride I hadn't felt since I was a child. Vanessa, you deserved that car. You deserved better. His words built a spine inside me, stronger than any steel. I turned to them, to the people who called themselves my protectors, and I saw nothing but strangers in their skin. My mother's lip quivered, a single tear sliding down, but I felt no pity. My father's hands twitched as if reaching for a lie he could still sell me. Not today. My voice was steady as I asked, "Where is it?" They froze. "Vanessa, we can talk. Where is it?" That day, something shattered between us. No apology could ever rebuild it. No excuse would ever bind me to their leash again. Their control had died the moment they got caught. And I knew then that my revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be methodical, precise, unstoppable. They stole my freedom on my birthday. I would burn every illusion they ever built to the ground, one truth at a time. They tried to keep me quiet, hissing apologies through clenched teeth as if their shame could be hidden behind a whisper. My grandfather refused to let them off the hook. "Where is the car, Daniel?" he demanded, voice iron-strong. My father's shoulders slumped, the last of his pride leaking out like stale water. We sold it. Sold it. My breath caught in my throat. 1,000 memories crashing down at once. Every weekend I'd walked miles to my shift. Every night I'd come home exhausted while they sat in comfort, watching me struggle, knowing the keys to my freedom sat rotting in a dealership lot. I saw my mother's eyes dart away, the same eyes that used to read me bedtime stories. Now, all I saw was betrayal. "We needed the money," she whispered, as if that made it any better. "They spent it. They sold my gift, my future, and spent it." I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to fall. My grandfather's voice boomed through the living room like a funeral bell. "On what?" They couldn't answer. I already knew. Their vacations. Their credit cards. Their pathetic image of a perfect family built on my suffering. That moment was my rebirth. I didn't belong to them anymore. The fire inside me demanded justice, not just for the stolen car, but for every sacrifice they took from me without asking. I would not scream. I would not beg. Instead, I'd make them watch me rise, step by step, until I stood so tall they'd choke on their own envy. My grandfather nodded to me, silent permission in his eyes, as if telling me it was time to break free. And I promised him with a single breath, they would never clip my wings again. That night, I packed a small bag, just the essentials, because I refused to breathe the same air as them a second longer. My grandfather waited by the door, hands steady, eyes burning with a quiet fury that made me feel safe for the first time in years. "Vanessa," he said, "come with me." No hesitation. My parents tried to block me, their voices cracking in frantic pleas. "We're still your family." But they were too late. Family doesn't steal your dreams. Family doesn't sell your freedom and call it love. I stepped past them, 1,000 memories crumbling under my feet like dead leaves. My grandfather's truck smelled like old leather and fresh hope. As we drove away, I refused to look back at that poisoned house. He took me to his place, a quiet farmhouse an hour out of town, where the stars seemed to breathe easier. I fell asleep in the guest room, the silence wrapping around me like a new beginning. But rage does not rest, does it? In the dead of night, I lay awake, replaying every lie, every smile they weaponized to keep me small. They had stolen money that wasn't theirs. And they'd done it because they thought I'd never find out. They underestimated me. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. I'd find out every dollar they took, every secret they buried. I would expose them to every friend, every neighbor, every distant relative who still thought they were saints. They made me their prisoner. I was going to become their worst nightmare. Morning light peeled away the night, but my anger stayed, sharp, awake, alive. My grandfather sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming between his big weathered hands. "What's your plan?" he asked, voice calm, but eyes hungry for truth. I told him everything, how they'd controlled my accounts, how every paycheck somehow vanished, how I'd been left begging for rides while they paraded around with new clothes and fancy dinners. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into an old file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder, bank statements, receipts, records. "I've kept copies," he said, "just in case they pulled something like this." My chest squeezed. All these years, he had been my silent guardian. I flipped through the evidence, each line a bullet through their mask. Vacations paid from my birthday funds. Credit card balances mysteriously cleared just days after my supposed college savings were withdrawn. They had stolen thousands of dollars meant for me. Thousands. A shaking rage took hold of me, but I refused to cry. I would weaponize the facts. By the end of the week, I'd file a report. I'd freeze every account. I'd confront them with their sins, recorded and undeniable. My grandfather promised to stand by me, his jaw set like iron. I felt something new in my blood, power. They had stolen my dreams for far too long. Now I'd take theirs. They would taste the kind of fear they'd taught me to swallow. When I was done, they'd know exactly what it felt like to watch your world slip through greedy fingers. This was no longer about a car. This was about me finally breaking their grip for good. By the time I stood on their doorstep again, I was no longer their daughter. I was a reckoning. My grandfather waited beside me, a silent mountain, while I rang the bell. My father answered, forced a pitiful smile, eyes darting behind me as if searching for an escape route. Too late. I stepped forward, folder in hand. "We're going to talk," I said, each word a loaded weapon. Their living room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in on their dirty secrets. I laid out the papers one by one, bank statements, forged signatures, dates, receipts. Their panic was almost musical. My mother's voice shook. "Vanessa, you don't understand." "No," I snapped. "You don't understand. You stole from me." My father tried to stand, but my grandfather's voice pinned him to the couch. "Sit down, Daniel." I watched them shrink before me. I had been their puppet for too long, dancing for their praise, desperate for their approval. But no more. "You are going to transfer every dollar you took," I said, "or I will press charges. Fraud. Theft. Elder exploitation." My mother's face fell apart. My father's fists clenched, but he was powerless. "How could you do this to us?" she whimpered. The hypocrisy nearly choked me. "You did this to yourselves," I shot back. Their perfect world was burning, and I was the match. My grandfather placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, his silent way of saying I'm proud. They had stolen my future. I was taking it back, piece by piece, until they had nothing left to hide behind but their own shame. They tried to negotiate, to twist the knife one last time. "Vanessa, if you do this, you'll ruin us," my father pleaded, as if the word ruin meant anything after what they'd done to me. I didn't flinch. "You ruined yourselves," I said, voice cold enough to slice glass. My mother sobbed into her hands, but her tears fell on deaf ears. I had cried too many times alone, wondering why nothing was ever mine, why every dream felt out of reach. "No more." My grandfather spoke then, his voice calm but absolute. "You'll sign the transfer paperwork today. If you refuse, she'll press charges. And I will testify." My father crumbled, the final layer of arrogance shattering. They signed. It was almost anticlimactic. How easy it was once the truth had been dragged, raw and dripping, into the light. I stood taller than I ever had in their house, the fear that had lived in my bones for so long replaced by a hard-earned peace. As I gathered the documents, I caught my mother's eyes, hollow, lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because sympathy had no place here. They had taken my independence, my trust, my faith in family, and tried to bury it under their greed. And now, they would watch me rebuild it all without them. I turned to leave, my grandfather at my side, a quiet sentinel. They could keep their apologies. I was done being their victim. I was my own future now, and no one would ever steal it from me again. It took less than a week for the money to hit my new account, every stolen cent, reclaimed. I used part of it to buy a car of my own, keys heavy with liberation as I held them in my palm. My grandfather stood beside me at the dealership, eyes shining with pride, like he was witnessing my rebirth. When I drove away that day, the engine roared through my veins like a war cry. I was free. Free from their lies. Free from the chains of their conditional love. My parents tried to reach out later, text messages dripping with regret. Apologies scripted like bad television. I left them on read. Because forgiveness is earned, not demanded. They had taught me that the hard way. I started college that fall, my name finally on every document, every piece of paper, every dream. No one would rewrite my story again. Some nights, I still see my mother's tears or hear my father's panicked voice. But they are ghosts now, powerless against the woman I have become. The woman who rose from the ashes of their betrayal. I built a life with no debts to them, no guilt, no chains. One day, maybe, they will understand the price of stealing another person's freedom. But even if they never do, I will sleep peacefully, knowing I claimed back what was mine. They underestimated me. They will never make that mistake again. Justice, clean and final, closed around me like credits rolling on the last scene of a brutal movie. What would you do if the people who raised you turned out to be the ones who stole your future? They tried to control Vanessa, to steal the very gift that could have given her wings. They sold her car, spent her money, and lied for years until one birthday shattered their perfect mask. With her grandfather's strength behind her, Vanessa stood up, exposed every lie, and took back her freedom piece by piece. In the end, she drove away in her own car with her own name, on her own terms, leaving the thieves of her dreams choking on their regrets. Subscribe for more real, raw, and revenge-filled stories that feel like a short film. If you've ever had to break free from people who claim to love you, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments. Do you think Vanessa should ever forgive her parents?